There are moments that seem completely ordinary until they suddenly awaken something you thought was already gone, and your soulmate may have experienced one of those moments recently. They weren't sitting somewhere intentionally thinking about you. They weren't searching through old memories or trying to revisit the past. They were simply going through an ordinary part of their day when something caught their attention, and for a moment everything around them seemed to become strangely familiar. A sound, a place, a familiar expression, a particular song, or even a tiny detail connected to an old memory suddenly brought you into their mind. At first, they probably tried to ignore it. They may have smiled at the coincidence and continued with whatever they were doing. But then another memory appeared, then another. And suddenly, something they thought they had buried beneath time and distance began rising back to the surface. Listen carefully, because the surprising part isn't that they remembered you. It's the feeling that came with the memory. Their heart reacted before their mind could explain what was happening. They remembered emotions they hadn't allowed themselves to feel for a long time, and for a brief moment, the distance between the past and the present seemed to disappear. They may have wondered why something so simple could affect them so deeply. Why could one small reminder bring back so many details they thought they had forgotten? Why did they suddenly remember the way you spoke, the way you looked at them, the way certain moments felt when the two of you were together? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question began forming quietly inside them. If those feelings were truly gone, why did they return so quickly? Your soulmate may not have an answer yet, but something has already changed. That unexpected reminder opened a door they believed they had closed, and what they find behind it may reveal feelings they were never truly finished with. And after that first unexpected reminder, something strange began happening inside your soulmate, because the memory didn't simply disappear when the moment passed. Instead, it seemed to follow them. They continued with their day, tried to focus on other responsibilities, spoke to people, stayed busy, and did everything they normally would. But somewhere beneath all of that, their mind kept returning to the same feeling. At first, they couldn't understand why. It wasn't as if they had deliberately chosen to think about you. The memory had simply appeared, and now it was opening other memories they hadn't visited in a very long time. One moment reminded them of another, and another led somewhere else, until suddenly they were remembering details they thought time had completely erased. And listen to this, the memories weren't necessarily the dramatic moments. In fact, the smallest details seemed to affect them the most. They remembered the way you used to say certain things. They remembered a particular expression on your face. They remembered the way you reacted when they were nervous, excited, frustrated, or quiet. They remembered little conversations that seemed ordinary at the time, but somehow remained stored inside them. They remembered places, sounds, routines, and tiny moments that they hadn't consciously thought about for months or even years. And the more those details returned, the more they began realizing that they had never truly forgotten them. They had simply stopped looking at them. For a while, your soulmate may have believed that moving forward meant putting the past somewhere they couldn't reach it. They may have told themselves that enough time had passed, that circumstances had changed, and that whatever emotions once existed had naturally disappeared. They may even have convinced themselves that they were completely fine. But this unexpected reminder challenged that belief. It showed them that memories can become quiet without becoming meaningless. Sometimes an emotion doesn't disappear. It simply waits for something familiar enough to awaken it again. And that is exactly what seems to have happened. Your soulmate began remembering not only what happened between you, but how they felt when those things were happening. That distinction is incredibly important. They weren't just remembering your face or a particular conversation. They were remembering the emotional atmosphere surrounding you. They remembered what it felt like to laugh with you. They remembered the comfort of being understood. They remembered the anticipation of seeing your name appear. They remembered the strange excitement that could come from the smallest interaction. They remembered moments when they felt emotionally connected without having to explain every little thing. And those feelings began surprising them because they hadn't realized how deeply they had associated you with them. Perhaps there was a moment when they found themselves smiling at a memory before suddenly becoming quiet. Perhaps they caught themselves wondering what you might be doing now. Perhaps they remembered something they once wanted to tell you, but never did. These thoughts can appear unexpectedly when an old emotional connection is awakened, and your soulmate may have found themselves asking a question they weren't prepared to answer. Why does this still affect me? They might have tried to explain it away as simple nostalgia. Maybe they were just remembering a chapter of their life. Maybe they were simply feeling sentimental. Maybe the reminder happened to catch them at an emotional moment. But none of those explanations completely satisfied them because nostalgia usually brings back a memory, while this seemed to bring back an entire emotional experience. Suddenly, they could almost feel the atmosphere of those moments again. They could remember what mattered to them then, what they were afraid of, what they wanted, what they didn't say, and what they may have taken for granted. And that is where the memories become more powerful. They begin connecting the past to the person they are today. Your soulmate may realize that they are no longer the same person who experienced those moments with you. Time has changed them. Experiences have taught them things. Disappointments have given them perspective. Distance has shown them what certain connections actually meant. And because they are looking back with a more mature understanding, memories that once seemed simple may now carry a completely different meaning. Something you said years ago may suddenly make sense. Something you did that they barely noticed may suddenly seem incredibly meaningful. A moment they once dismissed may now feel like evidence of how deeply the connection affected them. This can create a strange mixture of emotions. They may feel warmth because the memories are beautiful. They may feel sadness because those moments are no longer happening. They may feel regret because there are things they wish they had handled differently. And they may feel confusion because they thought they had already moved past all of this. But perhaps the deepest feeling is recognition. They are recognizing that certain memories survived because they were connected to something emotionally significant. People don't always remember every person they meet, every conversation they have, or every ordinary day they experience. Yet certain moments stay. They remain tucked away somewhere inside, waiting for a song, a place, a phrase, a scent, or an unexpected situation to bring them back. Your soulmate may now understand why those memories survived. They survived because you left an emotional imprint. And the more they recognize that, the harder it becomes to convince themselves that the connection was simply a passing chapter that no longer matters. Something about you remained with them even while life continued moving forward. And perhaps that is why this unexpected reminder has affected them so strongly. It didn't create something new. It uncovered something that was already there. It reminded them of a part of their emotional history they had stopped acknowledging. Now they are beginning to understand that forgetting the details was never the same as forgetting the feeling. The memories were still there, quietly waiting beneath the surface. And once that door opened, your soulmate discovered that there was far more inside than they expected. But among all those memories, one particular feeling keeps returning stronger than everything else, and that feeling may be the reason their heart has become so difficult to silence. And that is when the memories begin turning into something much deeper, because your soulmate is no longer simply remembering what happened between you. They are beginning to remember what it felt like to be connected to you, and that difference is becoming impossible for them to ignore. The unexpected reminder may have started everything, but now their own emotions are carrying the story forward. They may find themselves thinking about you during quiet moments, not because they deliberately choose to, but because the smallest things keep leading their thoughts back in the same direction. A familiar song suddenly has meaning again. A certain place brings back an old conversation. Someone says a phrase that sounds strangely familiar, and for a second, your soulmate is transported back into a moment they thought they had left behind. And listen carefully. What surprises them most is not the memory itself. It is how quickly the emotion returns with it. They can remember something from long ago and suddenly feel the same warmth, sadness, curiosity, or longing that they associated with that moment. It makes them question their own assumptions. They may have believed that time had changed everything, that distance had weakened the connection, or that they had finally become emotionally detached. But now they are wondering whether they simply learned how to live without acknowledging what was still inside them. That is a difficult realization because it forces them to separate being busy from being healed and being distracted from actually letting go. Your soulmate may have continued their life normally. They may have met new people, experienced new situations, and created new memories. Yet this one unexpected reminder revealed that some emotional memories occupy a completely different place in the heart. They don't compete with the present. They simply remain part of someone's story. And perhaps your soulmate is beginning to understand that now. They are looking at the connection with more maturity than they had before. Instead of asking whether they should still feel something, they are asking what those feelings are trying to teach them. Maybe they are realizing that you made them feel understood at a time when they desperately needed understanding. Maybe they remember how comfortable they felt around you. Maybe they remember being able to share things they rarely told anyone else. Maybe they remember the way your presence brought out emotions they didn't know how to express. These memories can become powerful because they remind someone of a version of themselves that existed in a particular connection. And sometimes we don't only miss the person, we miss who we were when we were with them. Your soulmate may be discovering that they miss that version of themselves too. They may remember being more open, more hopeful, more emotionally vulnerable, or simply happier in ways they didn't fully appreciate at the time. That realization can create a quiet ache because it raises another question. If that connection meant so much, why did they allow themselves to become so distant from it? Perhaps fear played a role. Perhaps timing wasn't right. Perhaps they didn't know what they wanted. Perhaps they were protecting themselves from vulnerability. Or perhaps they simply assumed that there would always be another opportunity to understand everything later. But later has a way of changing people. Now they have perspective that they didn't have before. They can look at old choices and see the emotional consequences more clearly. They can recognize moments where they avoided difficult conversations, ignored their feelings, or acted as though they cared less than they actually did. And this is where forgotten feelings can become uncomfortable. Because once your soulmate realizes that the emotions survived, they also have to acknowledge that they may have spent a long time trying to convince themselves otherwise. They may have told themselves that the connection wasn't that important. They may have minimized certain memories. They may have deliberately avoided places, songs, conversations, or anything that brought you back into their mind. Yet now one unexpected reminder has shown them that avoidance is not the same as resolution. You can stop talking about something without truly making peace with it. You can stop looking backward while still carrying something from the past. And perhaps their heart is finally asking them to acknowledge that truth. Not necessarily to recreate the past, not necessarily to force a particular future, but simply to be honest about what the connection meant. That honesty may be difficult because it makes them vulnerable. If they admit they still care, they have to acknowledge the possibility of regret. They may wonder whether they missed an opportunity. They may wonder whether things could have been different if they had acted with more courage. They may wonder whether you ever felt the same depth they did. They may wonder whether too much time has passed. And all of these questions can exist at the same time. But beneath every question is one undeniable realization. The feelings returned because something meaningful was still connected to the memory. The unexpected moment didn't manufacture an emotion that wasn't there. It simply gave an old emotion permission to rise back to the surface. And once it did, your soulmate could no longer pretend they were completely unaffected. They began understanding that some connections leave an imprint that isn't erased, simply because life continues. Sometimes the heart remembers what the mind decided to put away. Sometimes one ordinary moment is enough to reopen an entire chapter. And sometimes the most powerful realization is not that someone wants to return to the past, but that they finally understand why the past still matters to them. Your soulmate may now be standing at that exact point, realizing that what came rushing back wasn't just a collection of forgotten memories. It was a feeling they had never completely finished understanding. And the next question becomes even more difficult. What are they supposed to do now that they finally know it never truly disappeared? Now that your soulmate has recognized what those memories were carrying, the situation begins to shift in a completely different direction, because remembering you is one thing, but understanding why the memory still affects them is something much deeper. They may have spent a long time believing that the past belonged exactly where it was, behind them, and that moving forward meant never looking back. But this recent experience has challenged that belief. Suddenly, they are seeing old moments through the eyes of the person they have become today, and that changes the meaning of everything. A conversation that once seemed insignificant may now feel important. A moment they once dismissed may now appear like something they should have appreciated more. Something you said casually may suddenly sound like wisdom they weren't ready to understand. Even the way you cared for them may look different now, because time has given them perspective. They are beginning to recognize qualities in you that they may have overlooked when you were actually present in their life. And that realization can be surprisingly emotional. Your soulmate may begin comparing those memories with experiences they have had since then, not necessarily because they are trying to replace the present with the past, but because comparison sometimes reveals what we didn't understand before. They may notice that certain feelings were easier around you. Certain conversations felt more natural. Certain silences felt comfortable instead of awkward. They may remember how being understood by you felt different from simply being listened to. And slowly they may realize that what they miss isn't one specific moment. It is the emotional environment that existed around your connection. This can make the unexpected reminder feel much more significant. Because now they aren't simply thinking, "I remember that person." They are thinking, "Why did that person make me feel this way?" And that question can lead them into parts of themselves they have avoided for a long time. Perhaps they discover that they were afraid of how deeply they cared. Perhaps they realize they walked away because the connection made them vulnerable. Perhaps they recognize that they didn't know how to handle emotions that felt bigger than their ability to explain them. Or perhaps they simply weren't mature enough at the time to understand what was happening. Whatever the reason, the important thing is that they are finally looking inward instead of blaming circumstances. And when someone begins looking inward honestly, memories can become teachers rather than just reminders of the past. Your soulmate may start seeing what the connection taught them about trust, communication, vulnerability, patience, and emotional honesty. They may remember moments where they could have spoken, but stayed silent. Moments where they could have shown appreciation, but assumed you already knew. Moments where they could have been more present, but allowed fear, pride, uncertainty, or distraction to take control. Those realizations can bring regret, but they can also bring growth. And perhaps this is why their emotions feel so intense now. They aren't only remembering you, they are meeting an older version of themselves through those memories and realizing how much that person still influences who they are today. There may even be a moment when your soulmate stops asking whether they should be thinking about you and starts asking what they need to learn from the fact that they are. That is a major emotional shift. Instead of fighting the memory, they begin listening to it. Instead of immediately pushing the feeling away, they allow themselves to understand it. They may sit quietly and admit things they have never said aloud. They may acknowledge that you mattered. They may acknowledge that certain moments were more meaningful than they admitted. They may acknowledge that the connection changed them. And once those truths are spoken internally, something becomes lighter. Not necessarily because the situation is solved, but because denial is no longer carrying the weight. Your soulmate may also begin wondering whether you ever realized how much certain moments meant to them. They might wonder if you understood the impact you had. They may replay your conversations and imagine what they would say differently if they could revisit those moments today. And this is where the heart can become especially vulnerable, because they may recognize that some opportunities cannot simply be recreated. Time changes people. Circumstances change. You may have changed. They have certainly changed. That doesn't mean the memory has to become meaningless. It means the memory now belongs to a different chapter, one that can either remain a source of regret or become a source of understanding. Your soulmate seems to be moving toward understanding. They are beginning to see that the unexpected reminder wasn't a command telling them exactly what to do. It was an invitation to acknowledge something they had avoided. An invitation to recognize what their own heart had been carrying quietly. And perhaps the most surprising part is that the feelings returning now may not be asking them to recreate the past exactly as it was. They may be asking for honesty about what the past meant. They may be asking your soulmate to stop minimizing an experience simply because it ended differently than expected. They may be asking them to appreciate the person who once touched their life in a meaningful way. And as they sit with that truth, they may finally understand why one ordinary moment could open such a powerful emotional door. It wasn't really about the song, the place, the object, or the familiar phrase that triggered the memory. Those things were only the doorway. What was waiting behind that doorway was everything they never completely processed. The affection they never fully acknowledged. The questions they never answered. The gratitude they never expressed. The emotions they thought time had erased. And now those feelings are asking to be understood, not ignored. Your soulmate may not know exactly what happens next, but they know something important has changed within them. The past no longer feels like a distant story they can simply dismiss. It feels like a part of their journey that helped shape who they are. And that realization is preparing them for the final truth they are about to confront. Sometimes the heart doesn't bring someone back into your thoughts because it wants you to live in the past. Sometimes it brings them back because there is something about that connection you still haven't fully understood. And now your soulmate is reaching the deepest part of this realization, because after all the memories, questions, and emotions that unexpectedly returned, they are beginning to understand what that single moment was really showing them. It wasn't simply about seeing something familiar. It wasn't only about remembering a person from another chapter of their life. It was about recognizing that some connections leave an emotional imprint that time doesn't completely erase. Your soulmate may have spent months or even years believing they had already made peace with everything that happened. But this unexpected reminder revealed something different. There were still feelings they hadn't fully understood, memories they hadn't completely processed, and emotions they had quietly placed aside because facing them felt too complicated. Now they can no longer look at those memories in exactly the same way. They are beginning to realize that what returned wasn't just nostalgia. It was recognition. Recognition of how much you mattered, how deeply certain moments affected them, and how much they may have taken for granted while the connection was actually present in their life. And perhaps this is why their reaction surprised them so much. They didn't expect their heart to respond before their mind could even catch up. They didn't expect one ordinary reminder to make them pause, become quiet, and suddenly question everything they thought they had already understood. But that's exactly what happened. For a moment, the past felt incredibly close. They could remember the atmosphere of those moments, the emotions, the conversations, the little details, and most importantly, the feeling of being connected to you. And now they are beginning to accept that this feeling was never completely meaningless. It was part of their story, and perhaps part of the reason they became the person they are today. Your soulmate may also be recognizing something important about timing. Sometimes we meet people before we have the emotional maturity to understand their importance. Sometimes we experience meaningful connections while we are still carrying fears, insecurities, expectations, or wounds that prevent us from fully appreciating what is happening. Only later, after life teaches us different lessons, do we look back and realize what we couldn't see at the time. Your soulmate may be experiencing that kind of perspective now. They may be looking at the past with eyes that have changed. Things that once seemed confusing may now make more sense. Things they once dismissed may now feel significant. Things they once feared may now seem less frightening. And that can create a powerful sense of reflection. They may wonder what would have happened if they had understood themselves better back then. What would they have said? What would they have done differently? Would they have been more honest? Would they have allowed themselves to become more vulnerable? Would they have appreciated the connection instead of assuming there would always be more time? These questions may not have simple answers, but they are meaningful because they show that your soulmate is no longer running from the memory. They are finally allowing themselves to learn from it. And there is another truth they may be discovering. Remembering you doesn't necessarily mean they need to force anything into existence. It doesn't automatically mean the past must be repeated or that the future has already been decided. Sometimes a person returns to our thoughts because our heart needs to understand something before we can truly move forward. Your soulmate may simply be recognizing the value of what happened, the lessons it carried, and the emotional impact it left behind. And perhaps that is enough to change them, because once someone understands what a connection taught them, they begin carrying those lessons into every relationship, every decision, and every future chapter. Maybe you taught them how deeply they could care. Maybe you showed them what emotional safety felt like. Maybe your presence revealed parts of themselves they had never explored before. Maybe losing the connection forced them to understand what they had previously taken for granted. Whatever the lesson may be, your impact doesn't become meaningless simply because the story changed direction. Sometimes people influence us without knowing how deeply they did it, and your soulmate may finally be recognizing that. They may even feel grateful now for moments they once overlooked. Gratitude can be complicated when mixed with regret, but it can also bring healing. They can appreciate what existed without pretending everything was perfect. They can acknowledge what mattered without rewriting the past. They can recognize their feelings without allowing those feelings to control their entire future. And that is the emotional maturity this unexpected reminder may be creating within them. Instead of simply asking, "Why am I thinking about them again?" they are asking, "What does this memory reveal about who I was, who I am, and what truly matters to me now?" That question has the power to change everything because it moves the focus away from fantasy and toward genuine self-understanding. Your soulmate may not have all the answers yet, and they may still need time to process what has surfaced. But one thing has become difficult to deny. Something about your connection remained meaningful enough to survive time, distance, and silence. One unexpected moment simply uncovered what had been quietly resting beneath the surface. So if this message resonates with you, don't feel pressured to chase signs or force an outcome. Let your own life continue. Let your heart remain open, but let reality guide your choices. If your soulmate has something they need to acknowledge, that responsibility belongs to them. What matters for you is remembering your own value and understanding that the impact you had on someone else's life does not depend on whether they immediately return, speak, or make a particular decision. Sometimes the greatest revelation is simply knowing that what you shared mattered. And perhaps somewhere tonight, your soulmate is sitting with that realization too, finally understanding why one ordinary reminder could bring an entire emotional world rushing back. They may have thought they had forgotten the feeling, but the moment proved otherwise. The memory opened the door, the emotions walked through it, and now they are left with a truth they can no longer easily dismiss. Some people become part of our story in ways time cannot completely erase. And sometimes it takes one completely unexpected moment to make us realize just how much they still mean to us.